Wyoming Territory, August 1879, the wind carried the scent of dust and pine through the cracks of the half-rotted fort walls. And there she stood, Florence Bellamy, 24, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, eyes fixed on the horizon like she had been waiting a lifetime. Kade Vexler pulled his horse to a stop, boots hitting dirt just outside the sun-bleached gate of the long-abandoned Fort McAllister. He had not expected anyone to answer the letter he left tacked to the general store wall in Laramie, offering supply runs to the far-off corners of the territory. But someone had. A woman with neat handwriting and a request for coffee, dried apples, and rifle rounds. He tied his gelding and stepped inside the fort's broken-down courtyard, holding a crate in his arms. "Florence Bellamy," he called. She turned slowly, cautious, a rifle resting against her hip. Her face was windburned, her boots worn down to the stitching, but her eyes held a quiet fire that stopped him. "I am," she said. "You brought the supplies," he nodded, setting the crate down near the well. "Kade Vexler." "That's my horse, Tucker. You alone out here?" A pause, her shoulders stiffened. "Yes," he caught the lie, but not with judgment. She did not owe him answers. He just nodded and opened the crate. "Coffee, apples, rounds, tin of beef stew and some soap too." "Figured you might need it." Her fingers lingered on the edge of the box, not yet reaching in. "Thank you." Kade watched her a moment. "This place is falling in on itself. You sure it is safe?" "I did not ask for an opinion," she said quietly, not unkind. "Just the supplies." He gave a half smile. "Fair enough." Kade made camp just outside the fort walls that night. He had not planned to stay, but he did not feel right leaving. Wolves howled in the distance, and Florence did not light a fire. He figured she was saving the wood, or maybe staying hidden. The next morning, she stepped out while he was boiling coffee beside his fire. Her coat was buttoned all the way up, and her hair was tied back like she had done it in a hurry. "You said you were heading to Laramie again," she asked. "Tomorrow." "I can write another list," he nodded. "You can." "But I have a question first." She looked at him, cautious. "Why are you really out here?" Her jaw worked. She almost turned back, but then something in her shifted. "Because I had nowhere else." He waited. She stepped closer to the fire. "My husband died 2 winters ago. He was military. We lived in Cheyenne. After he passed, things got bad. I was told I was not needed anymore on the base. Then things with my brother-in-law." She stopped, shaking her head. "He tried to take my children, said I was not fit, that I was broken." Kade sat up straighter. "You have children?" "I did," she whispered. 2 boys, Keaton and Ali. They're gone." His chest tightened. "Gone? How?" She looked up at him, eyes rimmed red. "He took them. A judge signed off on it, said I was too unstable to raise them alone. I had no money, no family. I came here because this place was empty and quiet. I thought maybe if I stayed long enough, I would figure out how to get them back." Kade did not speak right away. The fire cracked softly between them. "I do not think you are broken," he said finally. She met his eyes, and something in her face shifted. Not trust yet, but maybe the beginning of it. He came back a week later, dust-covered and tired, but carrying another crate and something else, 2 books for the boys that he had found secondhand, and a folded newspaper with a notice circled in pencil. "There is a woman in Laramie who helps mothers in custody fights," he told her as she unpacked the soap and flour he brought. "She is not cheap, but she is fair." Florence blinked, stunned. Why are you doing this?" "I do not know," he said, honest. "Maybe because you looked like you needed someone to believe in you, and maybe because something about you won't leave my head." She stared at him, startled. He scratched the back of his neck. "I do not mean to scare you. When you said their names, I saw the way your hands shook." "That matters." She looked down at her hands then, like she had not noticed. "Thank you," she said, voice rough. "I do not know what to do with someone being kind anymore." "You do not have to do anything," he said gently. "Just let me help." By the 3rd visit, she let him stay inside the fort at night. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, passing a tin of beans between them, the silence less heavy now. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "But I am afraid I'll lose myself if I do." He looked at her closely. "Florence, I think you already found yourself, you just do not see it yet." She let out a breath, one hand resting on her knee. "I was a wife, a mother. Now I am just a memory with no one to remember me." He reached across the fire and put his hand gently over hers. You are more than that, I see you. She stared at his hand, then she turned hers over, palm to palm with his. Her fingers tightened. By the 4th week, she started smiling more. They repaired part of the fort's roof together, and he caught her humming once while sorting supplies. She still flinched at noises sometimes, still looked east every dusk, like waiting for someone to come take something else from her. But she was softer when she looked at him. She let him touch her arm without pulling away one night as they sat side by side, watching the fire throw soft light on the wall. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I stopped waiting for someone to save me a long time ago, she whispered. But I think maybe you are not here to save me. Maybe you are here to remind me I am still worth saving. Kade turned to her slowly. Florence. Her name sounded like a promise in his mouth. She looked up, and he kissed her soft, slow, like the wind brushing across dry grass. She did not pull away. Her hand came to rest on his chest, right over his heart. And just like that, the woman who had waited by the abandoned fort was not just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. By mid-September, the scrub grass around the fort had turned brittle and yellow, rustling like dry paper underfoot. The mountains in the west wore early snow on their peaks, and the mornings came sharp with frost that laced the water barrel and stiffened the canvas flaps covering the windows. Kade brought wool blankets this time, folded beneath his saddle. He tied Tucker near the corral, posts they'd reinforced with pine beams 3 days before, dusted his gloves on his thigh, and carried the bundles inside. Florence was standing by a cracked window frame, patching a tear in a boy's coat with small, even stitches. Her hair was tied low today, a strip of calico keeping it back from her face. She looked toward him without pausing her needle. You always bring more than I ask for, she said. Figured the wind was biting harder than you let on, he said, setting the blankets on a stool near the fire. Did you sleep at all last night? I do not waste time sleeping through wind that sounds like train whistles, she replied, though the slope of her shoulders said she was tired. He crouched by the hearth and began to stir the embers back to life. You ever think about building a stove in here? She tied off the thread and bit it clean. Would need metal, a way to transport it, and someone who knows how to install it without setting the place alight. I might know someone, he said. Blacksmith over in Rock Creek owes me a favor. She hesitated. That's a long way to go for someone you barely know. He glanced up, expression steady. I think I know you better than most. She folded the coat and set it aside, then sat across from him on the hearth bricks. Her eyes didn't waver. I found an old map in the storage room, she said. From when the fort was still manned. There's a lake 4 miles north, says trout used to run in it. Kade leaned back on his hands. Thinking about fishing, thinking about teaching my boys to fish, she said quietly. If I can bring them back here, he nodded once. You make a plan. I need a name for the judge's office, someone who can vouch for my character, not just say I'm not a danger, but say I'm capable. Use mine, he said without pause. Florence blinked. You do that. I've seen how you hold steady even when everything around you's crumbling. That's more than most. She looked down at her hands, then back up. I'd have to go to Cheyenne for the hearing. If I get one, I'll ride with you. You've got your own work. I've got time, he said. And I got more use riding beside someone rebuilding their life than hauling beans to strangers. A silence settled, but it was thicker than before, not awkward, just full. Like the pause between thunder and rain, Florence stood first. Then I guess I better start preparing. Kade followed her to the storage room where they sorted through boxes of what remained, old uniforms, cracked canteens, a broken lantern. She pulled out a small wooden box and opened it. Inside were 3 folded drawings in charcoal. 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10, their faces serious but full of mischief. She handed them to him. Keaton's the older. Illy broke his arm trying to ride a mule that didn't want riding. Kade studied the sketches, careful with the paper. They look like they've got "you're stubborn" in them. Her mouth twitched. They used to climb the roof of the house just to watch trains go by. She tucked the drawings back in the box and latched it. I've never told anyone the truth about what happened, she said. Not all of it. You don't have to. I want to, she said. But not tonight, he nodded, knowing not to press. That evening they shared dried peaches and cornbread by the fire. The wind outside rattled the shutters and a coyote barked somewhere past the ravine. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Then, without looking at him, she said, "When I left Cheyenne, I didn't think I'd ever trust a man again." He finished chewing before he answered. "I'm not here to be trusted just because I show up. I'm here because I want to be worth trusting." She looked over at him then, eyes glassy but steady. "You already are." He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The firelight danced between them, and something in her face eased like a door had been opened, and the wind could finally pass through without tearing the hinges clean off. Outside, the mountains stood still against the stars, and inside, a woman who once waited alone now sat shoulder to shoulder with a man who saw her not as a burden, but as a beginning. The morning they left for Cheyenne, frost clung to the grass like lace. Florence had risen before first light, folding away the last of her belongings into a canvas satchel, her boy's drawings, the patched coat she'd mended, a tin of dried corn she'd ground herself. She wore her thickest dress, the blue one with the reinforced seams, and wrapped a scarf tight around her neck. Her rifle was slung behind her saddle, covered in oilcloth. Kade waited by the gate with Tucker already saddled and a second horse beside him, smaller and chestnut-colored. He'd borrowed it from a rancher east of the pass, saying only that he'd traded a week's labor for its use. Florence didn't ask what kind. She knew Kade wasn't the type to trade anything he wasn't willing to earn. She mounted without help, jaw set, eyes forward. They rode out before the sun crested the ridge, leaving the fort behind without looking back. By noon, they reached the narrow gulch where the wind funneled through so sharp and fast it made the horses shudder. Kade dismounted, led them through on foot, and Florence followed without needing to be told. The trail was steep there, and the shale underfoot crumbled if you stepped too hard. "You ever been in front of a judge before?" Kade asked once they cleared the rise. "No," she said. "Closest I came was the hearing that took my boys. I wasn't allowed to speak." He adjusted the reins in his hand. "This time you will." She didn't reply, but her fingers tightened on the pommel. They camped that night near a shallow creek. Florence gathered dry grass while Kade struck the flint. The fire caught slow, but burned clean. She boiled water for tea with a pinch of pine needles and sat close enough to the flames that the heat flushed her cheeks. "Keaton never liked tea," she said, watching the steam rise. "He pretended, though. Said it made him feel like a grown man." Kade glanced over but said nothing, just poured a second tin cup and handed it to her. She took it, sipped, then set it down. "I used to hum to them while they slept, just low so they didn't wake. I haven't done that in a long time." He leaned back on his elbows, staring at the stars. "What would you hum?" She hesitated, then sang a few bars soft, tuneless, more rhythm than melody. Her voice held steady even when her eyes didn't. Kade didn't interrupt. When she stopped, he spoke low. "They remember that, even if they don't know it now." Florence shook her head once. "I'm afraid they've forgotten me." "They haven't," he said simply. The next morning, they crossed into flatter country. Meadows stretched wide, dotted with antelope and goldenrod. Florence kept her gaze fixed ahead. Kade watched the way she sat straighter in the saddle the nearer they drew to town, like each mile was a stitch pulling her tighter. They reached Cheyenne just before dusk. The air smelled of coal smoke and horses, and the streets were busy with wagons and riders. Florence reined in outside a modest boarding house on the edge of town. "I'll stay here," she said. "It'll be easier if I come in with a fixed address." Kade nodded. "I'll be 2 blocks south. Livery stable's got a cot in the hayloft. I know the owner." She looked at him then, braver than she felt. "Will you come with me to the courthouse tomorrow?" "Wouldn't be anywhere else," he said. That night, Florence sat by the small window of her rented room, hands folded in her lap. Below, the street lamp flickered, casting shadows on the wooden floor. She didn't light a lamp. She didn't need to. She heard boots on the stairs the next morning, measured, familiar. When she opened the door, Kade was there with a folded sheet of paper in hand. "I spoke with a woman outside the courthouse," he said. "She's a clerk, said the judge on your case is Caldwell, fair but strict." Florence took the paper and scanned the names. Her fingers trembled just once before she tucked it into her satchel. "Ready?" Kade asked. She gave a short nod. Inside the courthouse, the walls were paneled in dark wood, and the floor creaked with every step. The clerk behind the desk looked up as they approached. "Name?" "Florence Bellamy." The woman nodded, flipped through a ledger, then pointed to a bench. "You'll be called shortly." They sat. Kade didn't speak. He didn't need to. Florence's hands were folded in her lap, palms pressed flat. When her name was called, she stood with care, exhaled once, and walked through the door. Kade waited. He didn't pace. He didn't sit either. He just stood by the window, watching the wind stir the branches of a cottonwood outside. When the door opened again, Florence stepped out. Her face was unreadable. He held her gaze. "Well, they're reviewing the petition," she said. "I told them everything about the fort, about why I left. About what I want." "And what's that?" he asked, though he already knew. Her voice was steady. "To raise my sons where they'll never feel forgotten." He reached for her hand, not quick, just certain. She let him take it. "They said it'll take time," she added. "A few weeks. Maybe more." "Then we wait," Kade said. They walked back toward the boarding house, side by side, the wind tugging at Florence's scarf. She didn't pull away. At the door, she turned to him. "You said you weren't here to save me." "I'm not," he said. "But you stayed." "I did." Florence stepped forward, close enough that he could see the line of her jaw, the way the light caught the copper strands in her hair. "You make me feel like I've got a future again," she said quietly. He touched her cheek just once. "That's because you do." She leaned into him, slow and certain. Their foreheads touched, breath shared, and in the narrowing space between them, something settled that neither of them could name, but both understood. Not rescue, not redemption, just the beginning of something whole. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, carried in the pocket of a freight driver who passed it to Kade outside the livery stable. It was folded twice and sealed with a pressed thumbprint in wax. No return name, just the mark of a court clerk. Kade didn't open it. He rode straight to Florence without stopping for supper. She was in the back garden behind the boarding house, kneeling beside a row of winter onions she'd planted in the loamy soil. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, and her fingernails were dark with earth. She didn't look up when he dismounted, only said, "You rode hard." He held the letter out. It came. She stood slowly, wiped her hands on her skirt, and took it. The seal cracked under her thumb. Her eyes moved over the page once, then again, lips parted just slightly. When she looked up, her voice was thin but sure. "They're giving me a hearing. In person. Ellie and Keaton will be brought in from their uncles by martial escort. I can speak to them after." Kade stepped closer. "When?" 4 days. I'll need to prepare." She stopped herself, shook her head. "Nothing. I need nothing more than what I already have." He reached for her elbow just to anchor her. "We'll be ready." She nodded once, then turned and knelt again, hands back in the soil like it steadied her. That night, Florence sat at the small writing desk in her room, a candle stub flickering beside her. She wore her boots, even indoors, as though she might have to leave without warning. On the desk lay a folded piece of paper, blank. She picked up the pencil, hesitated, then began to write. "I never stopped looking for you. I never believed you'd forget me. I am your mother, and I will always come for you." She paused, tears held tight behind her eyes, then folded the paper and slid it into the coat pocket she would wear to court. 3 days later, she stood outside the courthouse in a slate gray dress, hair pinned neat, no jewelry, no ornament. Kade stood beside her in a clean shirt tucked sharp into his belt. They didn't speak as they waited, just stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a sky thick with cloud. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but full. A marshal led in 2 boys, one taller and lean, the other shorter with a stubborn set to his jaw. Florence didn't reach for them, didn't call out. She stood still, hands at her sides, as the judge read the petition aloud. Kade watched the boys. Keaton kept glancing at his mother, eyes flicking quick like he didn't want to be caught. Ellie stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The judge asked questions. Florence answered. Her voice didn't waver. "What has changed since the original custody order?" he asked. "I have," she said. "I've built a home. I've sustained it. I've remained sober, stable, and employed. I've made no demands and broken no laws. I've waited with patience and purpose." The judge looked over his glasses. "And the boys, do they wish to return?" There was a pause. The marshal nodded to Keaton. The boy stepped forward, hesitant. "She used to sing when the snow came, hummed real low. Our uncle don't hum. He don't look at us when he talks." Ellie spoke next. "She made us paper horses once, said they'd carry our names wherever we went. I still have mine." There was silence then, the kind that settles when something true has been said. The judge nodded slowly. The court finds no cause to deny the petition. Custody is to be restored to the mother, effective immediately. Florence didn't move. Not until Keaton crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "I didn't know if you'd try," he said. "I never stopped," she whispered. Illy leaned against her side, small fist clutching her skirt. She knelt and wrapped them both in her arms, face buried between their shoulders. Kade stood back still, his hat held in both hands. Outside, the sky broke open in a quiet rain, soft and cold. Florence turned to Kade as they stepped into the street, one boy at each side. She didn't speak, only reached for his hand. He took it without question. Back at the fort, weeks later, the boys slept in the rebuilt bunkhouse, their laughter still echoing faintly from where they'd chased lizards through the dry grass before supper. Florence stood by the window of the main room, arms folded, watching the moon rise over the trees. Kade came in after checking the horses. He paused in the doorway, watching her. "They've taken to it," he said. "This place feels like they belong here." "I was afraid it wouldn't feel like mine anymore," she said. "But it does, and more now." He crossed to her, slow. "You feel like you've come back to yourself," she nodded once. "And not just myself." He touched her cheek, then her jaw. She leaned into him, breath steady. "I never thought I'd have this again," she whispered. "You didn't have it," he said. "You built it." She looked up, eyes catching the firelight. "You're part of it now." He kissed her then, quiet and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't demand but promises. When they pulled apart, she smiled for the first time in years, not out of hope or memory, but out of something real and present and wholly hers. The wind moved through the broken gates of the old fort, carrying no ghosts now, only the sound of living. The first snow came in late October, drifting down in slow, deliberate spirals over the grassland beyond the fort. It didn't stick, not yet, but the air held that hush that always came before a long frontier winter. Florence stood at the edge of the porch with a wool shawl around her shoulders, watching Keaton and Illy take turns dragging a broken pine branch through the dirt like a plow. They'd been quieter since returning, not solemn, just unsure, like the world had broken once and they were waiting to see if it would do it again. But they'd begun to laugh again, sometimes without realizing. Kade stepped out from the main room, wiping his hands with a cloth. "Stove's drawing," he said. "Not perfect, but it'll hold heat through the night." Florence nodded. "You figured out the draft, had to chip clean the chimney. Bird had built a nest halfway down, nearly smoked me out." She turned to him, lips twitching faintly. "So it's warm now, warmer than the boarding house ever was." She watched the boys stop their game and start collecting rocks near the edge of the fence, likely for another one of Illy's forts. Her voice was low. "They still wake in the middle of the night sometimes. They don't want me to know, but I hear them. They'll forget the worst of it if they're given enough good days to push it back," he said. "I don't want them to forget," she replied, folding her arms. "I just want them to stop carrying it like it's still happening. They will." "Same way you did." She didn't respond right away. "Then I never stopped carrying it. I just learned where to set it down." He stepped closer. "Where'd you set it?" She looked up. "With you." That night, after the boys had gone quiet behind the bunkhouse wall, Florence sat cross-legged on the braided rug while Kade carved a new latch for the kitchen door. The room smelled of beeswax and pine shavings. She was mending a pair of mittens, Illy's, the thumb worn through. "You ever think about Kansas?" she asked. He looked up, knife paused against the wood. "Not in years. I was born there, just north of Wellington. We had a small place. My father planted corn too close together, so the stalks strangled themselves by midsummer. I didn't know you grew up on a farm. We didn't keep it long. Drought took it, then the bank took what was left." He set the latch down. "You miss it?" "No. I miss having something we thought would last. That land never loved us back." He leaned against the wall, stretching his legs. "You ever think this place might?" "I think this place listens," she said. "Doesn't promise anything, but it listens." The next day brought more snow, heavier this time. The boys dragged their bedrolls into the main room without asking. Florence let them, and Kade stoked the fire higher. Keaton curled by the hearth with a book, and Illy sat cross-legged beside the window, tracing frost with his finger. Florence poured 2 mugs of boiled milk and handed one to Kade. We'll need to hunt soon. Supplies are running thin. I'll take the trap line east tomorrow. Might be some rabbits still moving. I'll go with you, he raised an eyebrow. Boys, they're old enough to watch the fire. I'll leave them with instructions. She turned back to the stove, and he watched her for a moment, then said, You're not just watching over them, Florence. You're raising them into men who'll know how to come back to the people they love. She didn't answer right away, just placed her mug on the shelf. You say things like that, and it makes me think maybe I haven't lost as much time as I feared. He crossed the room and stood behind her, hands brushing her sleeves. You haven't lost anything we can't build again. She turned then, slow, and rested her head against his chest. You never asked for anything, never made me feel like I owed you. You don't. I want to give you something anyway. He tilted her chin up, and she kissed him, full and real, without hesitation. It wasn't a beginning or an end, it was something lived in, something tried and true. That night, she tucked the boys in and came back to the fire where Kade sat with a blanket slung across his lap. She knelt beside him, rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that until the coals dimmed. By early December, the bunkhouse had been outfitted with insulation from old military supplies salvaged in the storeroom. Florence had stitched curtains from wool remnants, and Kade finished building a new table from oak boards he'd bartered for with a passing freight team. The boys hung pine cones from the rafters and tried to string dried berries, hands sticky with juice. One evening, after supper, Keaton approached Kade while Florence was washing dishes. Are you gonna stay? He asked, eyes sharp, voice low so his mother wouldn't hear. Kade didn't flinch. I already did, Keaton nodded. She doesn't cry when she thinks we're asleep anymore. I know. Illy piped up from the table. She laughs sometimes, too. Florence looked up from the basin. What are you boys whispering about? Keaton grinned. Just making sure we get one more good man around here. Florence dried her hands, walked over, and slipped her fingers into Kade's without a word. They were married in the spring, when the snow melted off the ridgeline and the willows came back green. The ceremony was quiet, just the boys, the preacher from Rock Creek, and a bouquet of wild crocus Florence had gathered herself. Keaton wore a vest too small at the shoulders, and Illy carried the rings, though one slipped from his palm and landed in the grass, sending both boys into peals of laughter. Afterward, they ate biscuits and honey on the porch and watched the clouds roll in from the south. Florence leaned her head against Kade's shoulder. Feels like the first page of something. He kissed her temple. Feels like the whole book. Years passed. The fort never gained another garrison, but it didn't need one. It became a home instead. The fences held. The boys grew tall. Keaton joined the mail run between Laramie and Rawlins, and Illy built a greenhouse from salvaged glass and grew tomatoes that tasted of sun and rain. Florence taught them to mend, to listen, to speak with care. Kade taught them to track a deer through snow and how to know when to let it go. Their life together was not loud. It was not grand, but it was sturdy. And in the quiet hours after supper, when the fire glowed low and the windows fogged with warmth and breath, Florence would rest her head on Kade's chest and close her eyes, knowing without question that the life they'd built had held. She was never left behind again, and he never left her side.